Hi there, I'm Martin. With me today, Rob Sherry, fractional GM, ex-dealer, automotive principal, and ex-IBM executive. So bringing experience with big tech, enterprise, mid-market, and SMB. I'm keen to sit down with Rob and understand the impact of AI in the mid-market, automotive business, SMB market. Welcome, Rob.
Thank you, Martin. Good to be here.
Rob, motor dealers operate on the tight margins and high inventory costs. Where do you see AI making the biggest immediate commercial impact? Sales, service, inventory, or finance?
Good question. One of the biggest challenges facing the automotive industry generally, certainly in Australia, and I've seen this reflected in the US as well, is around labour tech shortage. And when I was running the local dealership, I had to sponsor 6 Filipinos to come in to augment local capability. So I recently read an article from Jim Farley, global CEO of Ford Motor Company in the US, and he was describing the chronic shortage of motor mechanic skills in the US, despite paying very large 6-figure salaries. So whilst AI might be useful in diagnostics and workflow scheduling and workflow optimization, the manual work in the service department still needs to be carried out by human beings. So I don't think AI is going to replace physical service work. The real opportunity, I think, for AI in the automotive industry is going to be in back office and decision support. Every dealership I know has huge amounts of data sitting in their dealer management system, and in large part, it's heavily underutilized. Dealerships are good at punching out financial reports, and what would be more beneficial would be management reports that managers can derive good insight from in terms of making better decisions. Anything that will enable the organization to reduce operating costs will be critical from the application of AI. And that's important because you've obviously got to offset this rising labour costs, but also, as we've seen most recently, even transport costs are going through the roof. There's definitely a scope with improving CRM systems and maybe just interpreting some of the data, the poor quality of data that sits inside some of those CRM systems. Right. They often exist in silos across the organisation, and from my experience, CRM systems are poorly utilised. AI has the capacity to give some better insights. There are some other avenues in the back office where I think AI could deliver some real value, specifically around inventory control.
Dealerships already use DMS, CRM, OEM systems. Where does AI sit as a layer on top of workflow optimization or something more disruptive?
The best initial opportunity is for AI to sit across the top of these different systems, so almost acting like an intelligence layer. The dealer management systems are legacy systems. They remind me of the old ERP systems, highly expensive to maintain, difficult to integrate with modern systems, and challenging to customize. That's how I think of these dealer management systems today. So if you could layer AI over the top, it could interpret this messy data that's sitting in these systems, which are often also sit in silo systems.
If you were running a mid-market dealer group today, what is the first AI use case you would fund, and what would you expect the ROI tolerance to be?
Inventory.
So that's your actual stock of cars.
So one of the biggest costs to any dealership is what they call their floor plan costs. So every car on the yard is tying up capital and accruing interest on a daily basis. Okay. So if any system or application or use of AI that could give you better inventory to reduce that cost would be highly appealing. And so you've got to think that the cars sitting on the yard today are based on decisions that were made 3 months ago. If you make a poor decision, you're going to have cars that sit on the yard for a long time. It's demand forecast, and in large part, it's not based off any data science. It's based off gut feel and intuition or experience of the stock control or the dealer principal. Now, if you get that wrong, it means your stock turns will be slower, the cars will stay on the yard longer, your interest will accrue, and you're going to have that margin compression and pressure on your margin.
So inventory management.
Anything that will enable you to make a better decision around the make, model, the colour, the variant of the car on the yard to enable it to sell faster.
What would make a business case credible in this sector? Cost takeout, revenue uplift, working capital improvement, or risk mitigation?
I'd like to say all of the above, but I think probably you mentioned earlier on, it's automotive industries, a high volume, low margin business. So a lot of it's about cost optimization. And I think that's what will resonate most. So if you can take cost out of the business, I think that's probably where you get your best advantage, and the early application or the time to value with AI will be faster around that cost takeout. Inventory is a big capital gain. So again, if you can improve those stock turns, reduce the way your capital's tied up in the business through AI, I think that'll resonate more with the principles of the businesses.
This is good advice for any kind of mid-market size business. Focus on cost, capital, inventory management.
It is. I've recently been doing some work with another organisation, and they were hemorrhaging a lot of cash, but selling more just exacerbated their losses. It was really around trying to get a handle on the control of the costs, and that's where they were making a big mistake. Particularly when you're talking high capital intensive industry like automotive, you can lose a lot of money very quickly if you don't manage your costs.
Mid-market and family-owned businesses often lack deep IT teams. Does AI democratize capability or widen that gap, you feel?
The answer to that is probably both. The access to technology these days is less of a barrier than it used to be. There's a lot of IT firms now, managed service providers, that can provide technology and certainly AI capability to augment internal teams. The biggest contributor that might be widening that gap is probably the willingness to explore AI as opposed to access to that capability. And so the divide will be driven by a mindset, not so much the technology.
So allow then a bit of experimentation at a relatively low cost, whereas in the past you had to pay for someone to come and pilot stuff and buy all the software. It sounds like it's easier to experiment, and then you can decide whether or not that's relevant for your business.
Correct. The key there is start small, experiment, prove the technology.
How should a mid-market CEO think about AI strategically as efficiency, tooling, competitive advantage, or existential threat to them?
You're going to accuse me of sitting on the fence here because I'm going to say probably all of the above. I don't think you need to look too far to see where even individuals are driving productivity and efficiency through simple uses of AI tools like ChatGPT. So I think that's probably the low-hanging fruit, whether you can do some automation of repetitive tasks or speed up the rate of research or comparing documentations. I think there's very easy use cases for driving productivity and efficiency. If you can derive greater insight out of the data that you already have in your system to enable you to make better decisions, to give you a competitive advantage, then certainly that's something that organizations should exploit. And the existential threat that you talk about, that is real too, because if you can't control your costs in line with how your competitors are controlling their costs, you're going to find your margin compression happens quicker than you like. And that will become problematic for any business.
You mentioned the word insight a few times here, so I'm getting a sense of the more you can understand and get value out of the data you've already got, the better you're going to be.
100%. I think that's applicable to any business. But I know it's particularly true from my experience in the automotive industry. They have phenomenal amounts of data, but a very little amount of that is actually used. It's accessible, but the dealer management systems, they are very good at providing financial reporting, but they don't actually provide the management reporting, which is that interpretation that enables those insights or decisions to be made.
Rob, so you've sat in the GM chair, tight month, pressure from ownership, cash flow is the priority. In that environment, how do you even find the headspace to evaluate something like AI and what should be driving that conversation internally?
Good point, and you're right. The owners and the principals, they're wearing the sales hat, the marketing hat, the service hat. They're wearing many, and they're often too busy running the business to give sufficient time and thinking to things like technology or, more importantly, AI. But I think in a lot of these instances, these decisions and these innovations are going to be driven from the OEMs or from the franchisors. It's going to flow from the upstream. All the OEMs have a very strong incentive to make sure that the deal economics work and that the franchisees or the dealers are profitable.
So small business owners often wear 5 hats, as you said, is very similar to the automotive industry. When you were advising them, what was the biggest mistake you saw around technology investment, and does AI change that pattern or repeat that pattern?
Good question. I've seen 2 common mistakes. The first mistake is leaving it too late to adopt the technology. And some organizations will just continue to run their systems as they've always done, simply because they just work. There's no need to change. But the problem is when they decide to make that transition, the bridge or the gap is too big. And so it becomes more complex and more expensive than perhaps it needed to be. The second mistake I've seen is where organizations have made change for the sake of change. They've implemented software, for example, because they just thought it was the right thing to do or because everybody's doing it, and they haven't really had a defined use case. And so what you find is the software never actually impacts how the business operates. The businesses that will derive the best value out of AI or any kind of technology implementation are those that start with answering the question, what problem are we trying to solve?
Cash flow is the heartbeat of a small or mid-market business. Where does AI sit in that conversation? Is it a cost differentiator, a bet worth making early, or something that can pay back fast enough to justify the risk you take?
You're right, cash flow does drive decision making, and I think AI investment needs to be simple and practical. All operators want fast and real returns. I don't think there's a really strong appetite for a big tech bet. And so my advice would be start small, experiment, prove out the value, and almost rinse and repeat. So pick a small use case, whether that be service schedule automation or workflow optimization or management reporting in the dealership context. And if that works, great. Try something new, repeat, extend, build on that. And if it doesn't, move on and try something different. AI will reward businesses that experiment early and learn from that quickly.
I like that. Experiment and learn. Not buy it, implement it and run with it. Just experiment a bit and learn what can it do for your business.
I think so. And I think AI like cloud is going to become ubiquitous. We don't question it anymore. It's everywhere.
It's
we all use it. Ignoring AI probably isn't going to be a very strong strategy.
Many AI vendors are shifting to token-based or usage pricing. How do you think a mid-market GM or CFO reacts to that versus traditional SaaS seat models?
Well, we're used to SaaS models now. The introduction of cloud computing has made us all very familiar with these pay-for-consumption-based pricing models. But I actually quite like the idea of token, because the SaaS and the pay-as-you-go type models that we're used to now assume you know what you need. Whereas with AI, I think that those needs are evolving. And I think the token-based pricing model allows for a little bit more experimentation. And so it gives you that flexibility that suits that evolving technology.
The SaaS seats at the moment are a known fixed cost that you know, I've got this many seats, I need to pay that on a regular basis. The tokens, I think, start to become challenging where you're not in control of how many tokens people are using. Unless you set some boundaries around that.
I agree.
A bit like the old cloud computing.
When the IT manager just wants to crank up and there's no control over what he's resourcing or using. I guess there's that scope for a cost creep in that regard. It's not as contained as SaaS, but I guess that's the business decision's got to be made. The trade-off between leveraging the flexibility but the risk of incurring more cost. I think AI is less defined than the software as a service. And it's all about, I think in the early days of businesses, having the flexibility to experiment.
Ramp up, ramp down.
Ramp up, ramp down, but having the ability to experiment.
Rob, thanks very much. That was great. I was very keen to dig into this whole mid-market, small, medium space and understand what's happening there. So thanks very much.
You're more than welcome. Thanks, Martin.